Now, I made a comment in my past video where I said, the 90s was a time where there was a lot of good writers that came up with some original ideas. However, it was also the same time where stories can be destroyed for various reasons, which brings me to Gargoyles Season 3. Gargoyles was one of 3 shows that I consider one of the best series out there of the 90s. That goes to Batman, X-Men, and Gargoyles. Because they didn't treat kids as idiots. It didn't treat them as, oh, they're just dumb kids. Who cares? Oh, they can't pay attention for more than 5 seconds without, sound blaring. And the first 2 seasons of Gargoyles were great stories. And they adapted various stories from Shakespeare, like Hamlet. It also brought in mythicism, science, and mixed all together. We had deep characters from the good and bad side. And not to mention all the side characters that came out of the series. And one of the few anime series where you'd be like, I want to sympathize with the villains, but at the same time you're like torn. You want the heroes to win, but then at the same time you kind of understand where characters and why they did what they did. But then we had Gargoyles Season 3. Now, why did this happen? Now, for the most part, the Disney Afternoon / the Disney syndication run of anime series where a ton of the animated shows came from, like DuckTales, Darkwing Duck, Chippendales Rescue Ranger, all those type of shows, they were in syndication. Most of those shows simply ended after 65 episodes. Now, if you were a very popular series, they renewed them for 1 extra season. For example, DuckTales and Darkwing Duck, they got more than 65 episodes. Gargoyles was also one of them. The problems happened when they transitioned from the Disney syndicated afternoon run to ABC. For whatever reason, there's different standards and practices between the 2 points. Why? I don't know. Because of this, the entire series was dumbed down because they replaced basically all the writers. On top of it, they had to tone down the elements of what Gargoyles always did. So for the most part, the majority of the episodes are either lackluster, boring, or outright bad.
Egon Pax! Egon Pax! Shut the up!
With very few exceptions, and the majority of fans only consider the very first episode as the final episode to count with the other Gargoyle episodes because Greg Weisman wrote them. After the first episode, he left like everyone else. Now, that doesn't mean a show can go bad, but the problem was Disney didn't want what Gargoyles was doing. So a lot of things happened off screen that abruptly changed the status quo of what was going on. At the end of Gargoyles Season 2, we were in this big cliffhanger moment of Hunter's Moon, where the Gargoyles were finally found out where they were because they were hiding from Xanatos and various other people in the police clock tower. And that was simply blown up. So now the Gargoyles really didn't have any home to call. So we didn't know what was going to happen at the end of Season 2. Unfortunately, where we get picked up from Season 3, we were thrown into a situation that really didn't make any much sense and was confusing, and eventually over time became more of a slogfest to watch the series, which, I will admit, I never actually saw the final episode because I was just so underwhelmed and bored of the show, and plus other series just caught my eye. One of the major changes that they did between Season 2 and 3 was turning David Xanatos into a good guy. Now, I don't have an objection of turning David Xanatos into a good guy. Most villains can be redeemed to a point. However, the problem was it happened all off screen. We went from Season 2 to Season 3 and he was just a good guy because they had to change the status quo. Especially for a character who you love to hate. David Xanatos was written not just to be the evil bad guy and that was it. He had undertones, he had reasons why he did it, but it still didn't change the fact that he was a piece of crap toward the Gargoyles and various other people that he exploited. Everyone remembers what happened to Elise, his brother, for example. We don't forgive him for that. But the reason why it doesn't work is because for a character who was so conniving, so hated, at the end of Season 2, to all of a sudden just trust him out of nowhere, it just doesn't really work. You needed multiple episodes to actually build that up. Yeah, they try to work around it because, again, they're trying to work with Fox. David had his son. So they're trying to use those aspects of, to make us sympathize with David Xanatos turning good, but the problem is it's too abrupt, and specifically for a character who has tricked the audience and the gargoyles. That was his main thing. He would do that. He would manipulate our favorite characters. So for the most of us, we assumed that he was probably just going to double cross them later on, but he didn't. The next major change season 3 introduced us is the revelation of the gargoyles. Everyone basically knows now they exist, although I found that pretty dumb because back in season 1 we had the Cold Stone episode where we clearly had them on videotape, and there were so many numerous instances where they were either caught or seen by so many people. This should have really been a driving force through the whole series in general sense, but for whatever reason it just becomes the major thing in season 3 because it has to start the new main bad guys, the quarrymen, who are basically, they want to kill the gargoyles. They see them as a threat. It can go in a cool way. It's kind of similar to what the X-Men go through, for example. But the problem is when you start watching more and more of season 3, the stories become more and more stupid and or dumbed down. What do I mean? Well, in season 1 and 2, the shows are Y7. They can't go so much into the action, the fighting and stuff. They have limitations. They can't do certain things. But when you watched, fight scene in the first 2 seasons, they were compelling, they were cool, they were fun for kids, they were fun for adults. Season 3, it was like basically we went from that and then we went down a notch where it almost felt like a Y show. The action elements of the show were mostly gone. In a lot of cases, the gargoyles did not really fight. Every which way they could avoid fighting, they just simply didn't really do it. We have this big overarching plot line they wanted to push. The quarrymen, who were, a deadly enemy of the gargoyles. They would kill them if they found any statues. Then, of course, people in New York are also turning on them. Think Spider-Man, where some people agreed with him, some people didn't. We went from that to immediately going into dumb episodes where, Broadway goes to Hollywood. They were trying to showcase that gargoyles were not bad people, so they were using Broadway as, a hero and these various things. But it was, again, mostly, boring. Broadway hardly did anything. He was kind of like, used as the punchline. It was like always avoiding the quarrymen main plot line. It was almost on the line of too cartoonish. There were so many things that they were just not considering during these aspects. One of the major things was that David Xanatos did not want to be tied to the gargoyles, because remember, they were, public enemy number 1 at this point, so he didn't want to be linked to them. But then you have Fox, who's the wife of David Xanatos, set up the meeting with the gargoyles in the Hollywood episodes, so it's just like, how did no one figure out that David Xanatos was hiding them? So it was like the stories did not line up to what they were trying to tell. Then you have the fallout with the police station. Now, because the police station was destroyed, we didn't have the cops really focused on. So all the side characters like Matt Bluestone, Captain Chavez were virtually ignored. Except for one episode, we really didn't go delve back into the whole magical realm of gargoyles as well. It just strictly became this, New York focused. Another aspect that I also noticed was that a lot of the characters were mostly ignored. Now, there were a ton of episodes and, really important plot points to, like, for example, Brooklyn. One of his major storylines was to going from this, stupid idiot not thinking of his actions to becoming, the second in command of the Klan. But for the most part, all these side things that were initially set up in season 1 and 2 were pretty much ignored. Angela, who got introduced in season 2, she got thrown to the wayside, really didn't have much to do. Mainly, Demona got also neglected in the series. And Demona is a very complicated villain of the show. On one half, you want to root for her, but she's done so many horrific things, you really can't. So when Demona came back for one solid episode, it just felt like a waste because she really didn't do anything. It was the usual, she hasn't this ulterior motive that she ends up screwing up and then wanting to, that almost gets, herself killed, Angela killed. The show only had 13 episodes, and the writers, instead of focusing specifically on either wrapping up storylines that were from season 2, they kept filling it up with really dumb side episodes that were trying to be funneled into the main story but just didn't work. Another aspect of the show that was very odd was the animation style. A completely different animation studio had worked on it. And it was very distracting to the point where there were times where Elisa looked like a character from Lilo and Stitch. And not that I'm saying it in a bad way, it's just that Lilo and Stitch has a very specific style of animation that they do. It's a very different look. Gargoyles has a more realistic look. From the animation to the storylines, everything was downgraded. Now, like I said, a lot of people only consider the first episode as canon to the other series, and they just ignore the rest. But I will give the writers credit to one episode that I think they did a really good job on, and they did close a lingering plot line from the past seasons, which was the cloned episodes. In season 2, we got introduced that Dr. Severius had cloned the gargoyles. Clones, they didn't know what to do with themselves. Goliath's cloned Thalog, he became a villain. So in season 3, they wrapped up that story in a really, sad way. Since they were clones, their DNA was not perfect, they had faults, and they were basically, petrifying to death. It was also kind of a turning point where Thalog actually turned good at the last moment. So I think out of all 13 episodes, that was the only other one that I consider as a really good episode. Every little bit of the series just felt off in some way. Like, the writers did try to do episodes that were not done in the previous seasons. Like, they did try to do an episode that focused on Bronx. And obviously that's going to be a very hard thing to do because Bronx is, Beast Gargoyle. And you can only do so much emotions with that type of character. So you need other characters to, work with him in order to make him a focus episode. But even that they couldn't do. The story was revolving around this, random Amish kid who, family was like, you shouldn't be involved in any of these things. It was kind of cute, but for the most part, again, it came down as being boring. It was going away every single time to the stuff that people would have found more interesting of the Quarrymen. You set up these main villains of the gargoyles, and you basically just ignored them for like 60 to 70% of the episodes. And most of those episodes were fillers that really didn't go anywhere. And you only had 13 episodes to tell your story. What's ridiculous is that Gargoyles in season 1 also had only 13 episodes, and 5 of them were just about the pilot. But the first season feels much more bigger, more elaborate, more compelling compared to season 3, and they had the exact same amount of episodes. And I don't want to place all the blame on the writers, because when I watched the episodes, it really felt like they were being strangleholded, because there were a couple of writers in that writing team that, they could write. They wrote on other TV series that I enjoyed, and I liked their episodes. Because of Disney having different censors and practices between syndication and being on ABC, anytime they try to do what Gargoyles used to do was just simply blocked. You could even see it in the writing that the writers knew the show was going to be canceled, because the series finale was rushed. Because of all the lingering episodes beforehand that were just filler, and they really didn't do anything with the Quarrymen, the series finale was this really dumb plot where the Quarrymen were on a train, and the gargoyles had to stop them from, killing the people on the train. And it just felt contrived because, for the whole entire season, we were told that the world finally knew about the gargoyles and people feared them or embraced them. We had this lingering back and forth of which side will the show fall onto. Everyone's like, oh yeah, we love the gargoyles, all because they simply rescued a bunch of people on the train and stopped the Quarrymen, because the Quarrymen simply, finally exposed themselves as liars and hacks. And I'm like, there were so many episodes in the previous seasons and even in previous episodes where I was like, it only took this? Oh yeah, now the gargoyles are all happy and go lucky, la la la. It's just, I think that's what I could sum up Gargoyle season 3. It had potential, they had an idea, but didn't want to go with it. It meandered through various dumb episodes, and any potential episodes that people could have liked because they had an interesting premise, you pretty much ignored because you were so either annoyed because we lost the quality of the first 2 seasons, characters were acting out of character, we lost the intricacies of David Xanatos. I believe more people would have liked a couple of the other episodes, but because of so much damage happened throughout the season, no one gave those episodes a chance. I think Gargoyle Season 3 is a perfect example of how executive meddling screwed the show. And it's ridiculous when Disney announced the show's cancellation. Yeah, we canceled Gargoyles because the show underperformed. It underperformed because it was your fault. That's what I never understand with TV show execs. Yeah, you can screw up and you can make mistakes, and you can clearly see that when people stop watching the series. But if you realize that, the show was underwhelming and it failed, why didn't you give it another season and correct those issues? You clearly saw that whatever you did changed everything and screwed it up. Why not go back to the previous writers and tell them, look, we screwed up. Here's a second chance. See if we can recover everything in the 4th season. If not, we'll end it there. But in most cases, shows, once they screw up, they just don't give them a second chance like that. Even though season 3 ruined Gargoyles, I still think the first 2 seasons of Gargoyles are still the top of the line writing and storytelling out there. If you have never seen Gargoyles, I highly suggest you give it a chance. At least the first 2 seasons. Season 3 you can watch if you really just want to see how it ended. Overall, there were bits and pieces of season 3 I did like. The thing that really got me confused is how buried even Elisa got in the series. Yeah, the show is about the Gargoyles, but Elisa is a very important integral character to the show. Even she kind of was just there. We can't really show guns and shooting and fighting, so it's no one knew what to do with all these characters, so they just kind of got thrown on the wayside, and they just did all these bizarre things. The only other positive I can give season 3 was its remixed opening. I thought it was a really cool way that they revamped the original opening theme. What I don't understand is that why, when you watch the show on Disney Plus, they edited out the original season 3 opening and they just simply used the season 2 opening over those episodes. I don't know. It was the one good thing that season 3 did and you cut it out. Makes no sense. So yeah, unfortunately, Gargoyles, one of those great shows out there, ended on a really bad note. Now, would I like Gargoyles to continue? Of course, it has continued in other forms, mainly the comic series, which basically continues from the journey and completely ignores all of season 3. I would love those stories to actually be adapted into a new season of Gargoyles. And this is just a prime example of why standards and practices shouldn't be changing between syndication or primetime viewing. What does it matter? You have a set demographic. Kids were watching Gargoyles. It was a show for kids, and then you're like, oh no, we have to retool it. It's it makes no sense. And what do we get out of it? A canceled show.